The air inside the Whitmore Contemporary Art Gallery was thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of calculated conversation. Crystal flutes clinked, silk brushed against polished marble floors. And I, Elara Vance, stood in the center of it all, a perfectly painted smile on my face, while my insides twisted into a knot so tight I could barely breathe. The exhibition was my baby point 6 months of sleepless nights, transatlantic flights, and wrestling with temperamental artists who thought a blank canvas was political commentary. This night was supposed to be my triumph. The grand unveiling of the Ephemeral Echoes collection, featuring the lost works of a reclusive Russian avant-garde painter-eyed trapped down in a tiny village outside St. Petersburg. The art world was here. The critics were here, and my fiancé, Liam, was supposed to be here. He was here. I spotted his tall frame near the back entrance, his signature navy suit immaculate, his profile irritatingly perfect. M.Y. Hart did a familiar Little Leap point 3 years together. 2 years engaged. We were supposed to be married in 4 months. I'd planned the entire wedding around the closing of this exhibition, White Roses to String Quartet. A custom Vera Wong gown that cost more than most people's cars. He was talking to Chloe. Of course, Chloe, M.Y. best friend since college, M.Y. confidant, the woman who held my hair back when I cried over a broken engagement ring from a previous relationship. The woman who had planned my bridal shower. The woman who was currently touching Liam's chest with a familiarity that made bile rise in my throat. I told myself I was imagining it. I was exhausted, and my blood sugar was low. I hadn't eaten since the protein bar I choked down at 6 a.m. And my wedding planning binder alone was giving me anxiety dreams. Liam loved me. He proposed on a private beach in Santorini. He'd written me a poem. He'd cried. Men like Liam didn't cry for women they were planning to betray. But my feet were moving. Through the crowd of velvet-clad patrons and insufferable gallery owners, past the swirling dresses and the cloying scent of expensive lilies. My Diane von Furstenberg wrap dress felt like a straitjacket. M.Y. Stuart Weitzman heels clicked against the floor, a frantic metronome counting down to the moment the illusion shattered. I rounded the corner into the private viewing room, a smaller annex reserved for the most exclusive pieces in the collection. The lighting was dimmer here, intimate. The painting in the center of the room, a sublime swirl of blues and golds, was worth a small fortune. I noticed none of it. M.Y. gaze was locked on the back of Liam's head. And then I heard it, her voiced Chloe's voice. She's so clueless. It's almost sad. The way she prattles on about the Provençal lavender for the wedding favors. Lavender. Liam, did I end February? She's got no idea you're going to leave her. Liam chuckled. The sound was low, intimate, completely foreign to me. She's a project. Chloe did a very wealthy, very useful project. The trust fund is the prize. The rest is just window dressing. The gallery, the grand gestures, it's all a performance. My vision tunneled. The edges of the room turned blurry. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. A project. That's what I was 0.3 years of my life. M.Y. Trust Fund. The $18 million I'd inherited from my grandmother, the woman who'd raised me after my parents died in a plane crash when I was 12. Get rid of her before the wedding. Chloe purred. You've already transferred the funds. The offshore account is set up. And I can finally stop sneaking around. The penthouse in Tribeca is in my name. Will be set. She'll be left with nothing but that pathetic little gallery and a broken heart. It's almost poetic. I pushed the door open. The sound of a heavy brass handle hitting the wall was a gunshot in the silent room. Chloe's had snapped up. Her flawless face, the one I'd called radiant at her birthday party last month, contorted in a split second of panic before smoothing into practiced serenity. Liam turned, his eyes widened. The man who'd held my hand and told me I was his entire universe stared at me as if I were a stranger who'd wandered into his private dressing room. Elara, we were just planning my financial ruin? I heard myself say, and my voice was surprisingly steady. Inside, I was screaming. Every memory flashed through my mind. The time he'd cried on my shoulder after his startup had failed, the business loans I'd co-signed, the venture capital firm I'd introduced him to, the apartment we'd bought, the joint accounts. Everything was a lie. I've been in love with Chloe for 2 years, Alara, Liam said, just like that. And oh preamble, and oh apology. He looked at me with a kind of clinical detachment that made my skin crawl. You're a means to an end. It's not personal. It's business. Chloe stepped closer to him, her arm linking through his. We have all the receipts, Alara, the offshore accounts, the property deeds, the prenup you foolishly signed without a lawyer. You signed over your grandmother's estate to a trust with Liam as the primary beneficiary. You were so trusting, so sweet. It's almost a shame. I felt the blood drain from my face. My grandmother's estate, the house in the Hamptons, the paintings, the jewels, everything. I'd signed it all over because I loved him. Because he'd made me believe we were building a life together. It's all gone, I whispered. Not to him, to myself, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Everything. Chloe smiled. A thin, predatory smile. Almost everything. You can keep the gallery. But judging by the critics' reviews, it won't be worth much after tonight. Word of mouth is so powerful, isn't it? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my empty apartment, the one Liam hadn't taken yet, because he'd been meticulous in his planning and had already sold it from under me, and stared at the wall. The movers had taken most of the furniture. The buyers were coming in the morning, but I had a suitcase, the laptop, and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from Chloe's friends, taunting me. It was the shame that stung most that I was a grown woman, not a successful gallery owner. I'd built the Whitmore Contemporary from a tiny storefront in Soho into one of the most respected private galleries in New York. I'd negotiated with oligarchs and weathered art world scandals. And I'd been played for a fool by a man who'd never loved me and a woman I'd called my sister. The sun rose over the Manhattan skyline, casting a sickly yellow light through the bare windows. I picked up my phone .74 missed calls, mostly from Chloe's flying monkeys, no doubt. One voicemail from my lawyer, Gerald, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. Alara, we need to talk. The estate trust has been accessed. There's been a transfer. The funds are gone. Call me. I called him back. He used the word fraud. He mentioned the word police. He talked about restitution. But I wasn't listening. My mind was rewinding to a conversation I'd had with my grandmother 5 years ago, a week before she died. She'd looked at me with her sharp blue eyes, the ones that had seen the fall of empires and the rise of fortunes, and she'd said, Alara, my darling, I've set aside a secondary trust. One that no one knows about, not even your father. It's only to be accessed in emergencies, the kind of emergency that involves someone trying to steal everything you love. I hadn't thought about that conversation in years. IT was filed away in the same dusty mental cabinet as my childhood memories of ballet recitals and summer vacations in the south of France. A contingency plan from a woman who'd survived 2 world wars and 3 terrible husbands. I dismissed it as the ramblings of a paranoid old woman. But I'd kept the documents in a safety deposit box at a bank Liam didn't know about. Because deep down, in some primal self-preservation instinct, I'd never fully trusted him either. I gathered my dignity, I showered, and I put on my smartest black suit, a Beatrice Brady I'd bought at a sample sale and never worn because Liam said it was too severe, and I marched to the bank. It took 3 hours of paperwork, 2 angry phone calls to Gerald, and 1 very uncomfortable conversation with the branch manager who clearly thought I was a delusional woman who'd just discovered her husband's gambling addiction. But I got the documents. The secondary trust was worth $800 million. I almost laughed $0.100 million. My grandmother had hidden it in a series of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, linked to a private Swiss bank account, tied to a brokerage firm in Singapore. It was a labyrinth of financial obfuscation that would have made the IRS weep, and it was all mine. The memories came flooding back. My grandmother sitting at her mahogany desk in the Hamptons, The same desk I'd watched her write angry letters to the editor on, her hands steady and strong. She'd hated Liam on sight. She'd called him a charming viper. I'd laughed it off as the paranoia of a woman who'd been burned too many times. I'd been so arrogant, so stupid. But now I had a weapon, a second chance, and I was going to use it. I didn't confront Liam immediately. I knew the element of surprise was my only advantage. He and Chloe were parading around the city like conquering heroes, dining at Per Se, attending fundraisers, appearing in society columns as the new power couple. The betrayal had been remarkably clean from their perspective. I was the pitiable ex-fiancé. The art world had already moved on. There was a profile of Chloe in town and country the following week, gushing about her philanthropic efforts and business acumen. Everything I'd built, she was pirouetting through. I started subtle that I contacted my old friend Marcus, a hedge fund manager with a reputation for being ruthless, that I told him I had capital, that I told him I wanted to play. He introduced me to people I'd only ever read about in the financial pages. I learned the language of hostile takeovers, of leveraged buyouts, of the quiet violence of commerce. Liam's venture capital firm, Summit Equity, was a predator in the tech space. He'd built it on the back of the connections I'd given him. The business loans I'd co-signed had been used to fund a series of hostile takeovers. He was aggressive, he was ambitious, and he was in debt. Up to his perfectly coiffed eyebrows in debt. I bought his debt. It took 6 weeks of phone calls, of flying to meetings in Geneva and Luxembourg, of signing documents in the middle of the night in hotel rooms. Marcus was my right hand, a silent partner who marveled at my newfound ruthlessness. "You're not the same woman I had coffee with 6 months ago," he said once, his voice tinged with respect. "You've got a darkness in you now, it's compelling." I didn't feel dark. I felt clear, a clarity I'd never experienced. All the noise of my life, the insecurities, the desire to be loved, the need to prove myself, had been stripped away. All that was left was a cold, hard purpose. On a Thursday morning, for months after the gallery opening, I sat in my lawyer's office. Gerald was nervous. He kept adjusting his tie. Across the table, Liam's attorney, a smarmy weasel named Bartholomew, looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. "She's been buying shares in Summit Equity," Bartholomew said, his voice thin and reedy. "Using a series of shell companies, she's acquired 51% of the firm. She wants to talk about a restructuring. A takeover, essentially." Liam was there. He looked haggard. Gone was the sleek, confident man in the navy suit. This was a man who'd been running on coffee and panic for weeks. I'd frozen his bank accounts the day before. Not with a court order. That would have taken months. I'd simply called the Swiss bank that held his hidden funds and, with the help of Marcus's forensic accountants, presented evidence of fraud. The funds were frozen overnight. He went from a multimillionaire to a man who couldn't pay his credit card bill. "That's not possible," he said, his voice cracking. "The trust funds, the estate, it's all gone. You have nothing." "I have $800 million, Liam," I said, and my voice was so calm I barely recognized it. That's the thing about trusting a woman's grandmother. She always has a plan B. You should have done your research. My grandmother was a corporate raider in the 1980s. She ate men like you for breakfast. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. Maybe worse. The revelation that I'd been playing him, that I had known something he didn't, was the most devastating blow of all. He'd built his entire strategy on the belief that I was clueless, naive, a soft touch. But I wasn't soft anymore. I leaned back in my chair. The view from Gerald's office was of the Manhattan skyline, a wall of glass and steel that seemed to pulse with the energy of commerce. "I'm not just taking over Summit Equity," I said. "I'm dismantling it. Every single one of your investments. They were funded with money you defrauded from me. Did I have receipts? Did I have records? I have forensic accountants who have traced every single dollar. I'm going to the SEC. I'm going to the FBI, and I'm going to the IRS. You and Chloe are going to be the subject of a federal investigation for the next 10 years. By the time I'm done, you won't have a penny to your name. You won't have a reputation. You'll have nothing but the clothes on your back and a lot of legal bills. I paused to let it sink in. Bartholomew was ashen. Gerald was trying to hide a smile. Liam stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. His knuckles were white. I'll fight you on this, he said. The prenup. The prenup was signed under duress. I cut him off. I was coerced. I have witnesses. And my grandmother's dying wish was that I never sign a prenup without consulting a lawyer. I have her letters. Handwritten, and your handwriting, Liam. The forged signature was a poor imitation. I've already had it analyzed. The prenup is void. You're entitled to nothing. The fight drained out of him. He sagged against the table, a puppet with its strings cut. I felt nothing, and oh pity, and oh satisfaction. Just a cold emptiness where my heart used to be. You're doing this, he whispered. Destroying me for what? For Chloe, I said flatly. For the 2 years you made me a fool. For every time you looked at me and said, I love you when you were planning my financial ruin. For the memory of my grandmother, who saw through you the moment you walked into her living room. You're not a man. Liam, you're a parasite, and I'm the exterminator. I didn't stop there. The day after the meeting, I made a public statement to the New York Times. The headline was brutal. Ilera Vance exposes fraud scheme, vows to rebuild. The article detailed Liam's duplicity, Chloe's involvement, and the freeze on their assets, the same social columns that had lionized them printed retractions. Chloe's charity, which was actually a shell company for money laundering, was shut down. Her name was Mud. I was at a restaurant in Soho when Chloe found me. She looked dreadful. She was wearing a designer dress that was obviously borrowed. I could see the price tag hanging out the back. Her makeup was smudged. She had the wild-eyed look of a cornered animal. You've ruined me, she hissed. Her voice was barely controlled hysteria. The charity, MY Reputation. The board of directors resigned this morning. MY name is being splashed across every gossip blog. They think I'm a common swindler. I took a sip of my wine. The Pinot Noir was excellent. That's because you are a common swindler, Chloe. You and Liam planned to steal everything I owned. You leveraged my grandmother's memory to do it. You didn't just betray me. You desecrated her legacy. I loved him, she spat. I loved him, and he loved me. You don't get to judge us. You don't get to lecture me about morality. You are the obstacle. The sad, pathetic obstacle with the trust fund and the perfect life you didn't deserve. I laughed for the first time in weeks. I genuinely laughed. Chloe, if you loved him, you would have seen he's a sociopath. He was using you too. You were his side project. The one he kept around for entertainment. He would have dumped you the moment the money was secure. He didn't love you. He loved your access to me. Her face crumpled. The realization dawned slowly, like poison spreading through her veins. She'd always believed she was the clever one, the mastermind, but she'd been played as thoroughly as I had. That's not true, she whispered. He said he would marry me. He said we'd go to the Caribbean. He's been sleeping with a junior associate at the firm for the past 6 months. I said I pulled out my phone, showed her a photograph Marcus's private investigator had taken. He never intended to marry anyone. The Caribbean was just an excuse to get you out of the country while he liquidated everything. He had a plan B too. You were just as disposable as I was. The final reckoning came 3 weeks later. I stood in the lobby of the Whitmore Contemporary, now reopened under new management. The Ephemeral Echoes collection had been transferred to the Museum of Modern Art. The critics had called it a revelation. I'd sold 3 pieces to collectors in Dubai. The gallery was thriving. Liam was there, not by invitation. He'd come to make amends. The media had turned on him. His face was plastered across tabloids, his reputation in tatters. The federal investigation was ongoing. He was facing charges of fraud, forgery, and money laundering. His legal fees were astronomical. He was penniless. Ilera, he said, stepping in front of me, his voice trembling with a desperation I'd never heard before. I made a mistake, did a terrible mistake, but I realize now I was wrong, that I love you. I always loved you. Chloe was a distraction, a lapse in judgment. I'm begging you. His voice broke. He reached out to touch my arm. I stepped back. The gesture made him falter. The tears started falling from his eyes. Real tears. Or at least good imitations. Please, he said. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't live like this. MY life is over. MY career is over. I'm nothing without you. I looked at him. The man who had held me and promised me the world. The man who had stolen my grandmother's legacy and laughed with the woman I'd trusted most. I remembered the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the shamed. I remembered the cold floor of my empty apartment. I remembered the feel of the documents in my hand, the weight of my grandmother's wisdom. No, I said. The word was final, and oh anger, and oh malice, just a quiet finality. You're not nothing, Liam, you're a lesson I learned, and I'm grateful for it, because now I see the truth. I don't need anyone to complete me, that I don't need love to validate me, and I'm complete on my own. I walked past him, he called after me, but I didn't turn around. The gallery was buzzing with activity, the hum of commerce and culture. My new assistant, a sharp young woman named Maya, met me at the door. The board meeting is in 10 minutes, she said. And we've got the donation from the estate of the Russian collector. The one you arranged. I nodded. There was a lot of work to do, but I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of the past had lifted. I was no longer the woman who'd been betrayed. I was the woman who'd rebuilt herself from the ashes. The future was a blank canvas, and I was the one holding the brush.